Welcome to the Healthcare Security Seminar Series, a discussion into the evolution of healthcare security with me, Tony York, your host, and a few special guests. I invite you to join alongside of me and some of the brightest minds in the security industry as each session we take a deep dive into the important topic surrounding the safeness of healthcare. Negligent security claims can result in significant time and money expenditures for hospitals and health systems, regardless of the outcome. And the current trend shows the number of lawsuits surrounding inadequate security in healthcare is increasing. Such litigation in healthcare is often argued under the principles of negligence. And in this episode, I'm joined by someone many of us know, William, or commonly referred to as Bill Marcisz, who's a JD, a CPP, a CHPA, and he's president and chief consultant for Strategic Security Management Consulting to explore each of the elements that must be proven in a claim of negligence. Bill and I are going to dive into some of the most common gaps found in healthcare security programs that can be most at risk and what claims that present the most exposure. Buckle in, as every healthcare security program must be mindful of the legal risks we face in our everyday practices. Bill, thanks for joining me and welcome to the conversation.
Well, thanks for having me, Tony. Appreciate it.
Now, Bill, you were a security practitioner who then became a lawyer, and now you're serving as a consultant who provides a litany of litigation support, both on the defense and the plaintiff side, and a host of other consulting services. But before we jump into the issue of negligence and security, tell us a little bit about your story and how it unfolded and how you've gotten to this position in life.
Well, I started off like a lot of folks and was testing to become a police officer and got a job at a hospital in Connecticut through I was taking a class called Security Administration while I was getting a 2-year degree. And it was taught by the then security director at Danbury Hospital. And towards the end of the class there in like April, May of it was 1983, he asked me, "Hey, would you want to come work for me?" I said, "Sure." And I figured it was a good stepping stone. But I stayed for 22 years, and so went and got my law degree. And well, actually, I was finishing up my bachelor's degree, and what happened was I had a couple of professors that I got to know pretty well, and they talked me into going to law school, and that's what I did. I was originally just going to get a master's degree in public administration or something like that, and I ended up leaving healthcare security and going to practice law down here in Orlando, Florida, and I ended up representing hospitals. That's all our firm did, was represent hospitals throughout the state of Florida. And so what I did mainly was medical malpractice defense work. So I was defending hospitals in that, and some premises work. Oddly, I only had one negligent security claim during my 8 years of practicing. So not a lot of experience doing that, but plenty of experience on the practical side in security. I went back into healthcare originally to become a healthcare administrator, and I thought my entryway would be through security, which I knew. And one thing led to another, and I ended up working at Advent Health and spent 8.5 years with that great organization, and just really watching the healthcare security field kind of mature and become very, very professional, particularly with folks like you, Tony, and I see my friend Brian Warren on the call here, and a lot of folks that just contributed either through the ASIS Healthcare Security Steering Committee, now well, it was formerly the council, now it's a steering committee, and then through IHOS and developing that organization and all the great guidelines and stuff that we have now to rely upon. So and then I stepped off into consulting in 2021 full time. I had started my business here, Strategic Security Management Consulting, more as a kind of a sideline because I never thought I would retire and play golf or go fishing or things like that. I know you enjoy, but I like doing security work. It's one of my passions, and so I started that as just to develop a client base, and then things just kind of went crazy during the pandemic and for all of us. And what was a retirement strategy became a full-time job. So here I am doing healthcare security. And just so you know, we're talking about negligent security claims, and I do serve as an expert witness and do provide litigation support for both defense and plaintiffs. I try to be equal, about 50-50 if I can. Um, but 90% of my work is still doing healthcare security consulting. So going into hospitals and doing risk assessments and advising security directors and healthcare administrators on the best ways and best practices on healthcare security.
Yeah, it's a great story, Bill. We're the benefactor as an industry of just all the things you've done and the investments you've made in your career and what you've been doing. And I would put you right there next to Brian Warren as somebody I just love having the opportunity to chat with and hear about what's going on and your viewpoint of the world. It's interesting. Your story reminds me a lot of an early mentor of mine who was instrumental in helping me to launch in healthcare security. He was a professor at Eastern Kentucky University by the name of Norm Spain, but Norm was a JD. Many of us that are a little long in the tooth might remember the old Spain report that he and his wife Judy used to write. But he sort of helped me understand what I didn't know about the legalities associated with the work that we do in this business that we've chosen. And but let me ask you a softball question. Why do you think we're seeing such an increase in the lawsuits surrounding inadequate security in healthcare? Well, just high high level, what's driving so much of that right now, do you think?
Well, what typically drives a negligent security lawsuit is an act of violence. So we're seeing an increase in workplace violence. We know that it's being reported throughout the industry, and every hospital I've been going into in the last couple of years, everybody's saying, yeah, we're trending upwards. So when you have acts of violence increasing, it just necessarily follows that you're going to have an increase, an uptick in negligent security claims.
Yeah, isn't it amazing just to think about? I thought we were going to be peaking in violence back in the mid 2000s, and whoa, was I wrong? If somebody was listening to me then, I thought, oh, maybe we've peaked. But we're seeing increases for two reasons: the actual amounts and the reported events. I think we're starting to see our care providers and allied health professionals starting to realize we do want to know it. The organizations are wanting to understand where's it happening, when's it happening, how's it happening, and what can we do to try to mitigate it. But no question, the volatility, it's probably the single largest industry driver for us, right? I mean, when it comes to everything we're doing, whether it's mitigations we're putting into place, budgets we're getting allocated to us, or whatever it may be. But let's stay on this grounds of negligent security, Bill. Let's go back to law school for a minute. You think about people are on hospital grounds, patients, visitors, employees. Their expectation is to be reasonably safe, right? But if the security protocols fail and someone does suffer an attack, the hospital can be held liable. But the issue to me of negligence is one of the most misunderstood topics that I chat with those that are practitioners that are serving the security needs and really those that are basically thinking about it. I find that they don't always have a full appreciation for the principles of negligence and the duties that we have. You know, the duty that we have, the breach, the damages, the causation. Bill, help us unpack that a little bit. Help the audience and myself know what must be proven to be found to be negligent by a hospital, regardless of the case. Feel free to use any scenario that comes to mind to yourself.
Well, there's four elements of negligence which you just named. So first, you have to have a duty to keep people safe from a specific type of harm, and then you have to have a breach of that duty, and then you have to prove that that breach was the cause of the damages, which is the fourth element. So, a lot of times I like to say, especially to lawyers when I do this presentation on negligent security, is start with damages, because if there's no damages, no lawyer is going to take that case. So, but the interesting thing about negligent security claims is that there's actually what I call the fifth element. That's foreseeability. And that gets you to the first element of duty. So a crime has to be foreseeable in order for a duty to attach to a hospital defendant. So, for example, um, and unfortunately for us in security or healthcare, as opposed to other industries, foreseeability is really tough to get a motion for summary judgment. It's tough to say that, well, a hospital couldn't foresee that this violent act would occur because so much violence occurs in hospitals. It's almost impossible to, I wouldn't say almost impossible, but it's rare that you would find that there was a certain event wasn't foreseeable. Now, that being said, we all work in hospitals, and for us that have been in hospitals for a long period of time, it's like just like when you think you've seen everything, something else happens that you just wouldn't dream would have been a fact pattern that you would have conjured up. So even though I say it's easy to prove foreseeability, there's always those odd things that are out there that could pop up in a healthcare environment that maybe a security director would not have assessed going forward, and then you could try to say that that was not a foreseeable duty, and then try to get yourself extricated from that lawsuit. But the one thing I will say, though, Tony, about negligent security lawsuits in healthcare is hospitals don't get sued as much as other types of industries. There's certainly more cases in bars and nightclubs and apartments and parking structures and places like that. But once a lawsuit hits a hospital, a negligent security lawsuit rather, hits a hospital, you're stuck with that. And the thing with that I would caution from a security standpoint, you know, is that that lawsuit is going to cost your hospital a lot of money, even if it's a bogus claim. It typically takes like a slip and fall without much work, much fact discovery, maybe about $50,000 in legal fees just to get that case to trial. Negligent security claims are a lot more fact intensive, and they require a lot more discovery. And plus they require an expert to come in as well. So the hospital's exposure in terms of legal fees and costs associated with just getting that case to trial are significant. So you want to stay out of them as much as possible. And that's where you, the security director, come in and make sure that you have a solid security program, because this is going to impact you as well. So I know a lot of times that you find I go into hospitals and I see that the security department may not have a good working relationship with risk management or the legal team. You want to develop that relationship and get them to trust you, and because they could be your best friends in terms of turning around and advocating for your resourcing, because it's a lot. I would rather give the security department an extra $100,000, to provide security measures that could prevent stuff from happening, than have to pay $100,000 just in legal fees, and then you take that to trial, and then you get tagged for a lot of damages too. So that's the other caveat with negligent security claims, is that they are what I call a high risk, high reward type of claim, especially for plaintiff attorneys. 31% of of jury verdicts that go in favor of the plaintiff are in excess of $1 million.
Wow, what a statement. 31% of all claims that come in go in front of the juries and for $1 million. That's something that we need to be posting up. Can you put a shirt on next week for the IHSS and make certain all of our colleagues are seeing that while we're together in Nashville? Because I think that's some of the arguments, right? And when you start thinking about really this whole issue, I mean, we start getting into what? I mean, we start talking about risk tolerances and how to have that conversation with those executives that are really holding on to the purse strings. And a lot of times, just the way we present, our return on investments, the rationale for making these determinations. But Bill, when you think about that and risk tolerances specifically, have you found any tips and techniques that you believe a practitioner could easily leverage or should be leveraging as it relates to having those conversations? I mean, what a great stat you just provided. But anything else that you would just want to bring to the audience?
I would say if you're either new or even if you've been in healthcare security for a long time, go go to the IAHSS website. And if you're not a member, you need to join.
Amen.
And just the value of those guidelines alone will give you the leverage you need to bring that to your administration. And so, like something like threat management or infant security, and whatever the issue might be for you in your hospital that you want to advocate for, make sure you pull that guideline and send that in your request, attach the guideline and say, hey, this is what it looks like in the rest of America or wherever you might be from uh, in terms of professional healthcare securities. And that's the one thing I would really stress is because uh, what the International Association for Healthcare Security is so professional, especially like I say, in the last 15, 20 years, just a dedicated group of volunteers just um, picking each other's brains and advocating and really just developing these guidelines it's pretty amazing that um, we didn't have that. And I don't want to be like that old guy saying, I had to go, I had to walk 3 miles to school uphill in a snowstorm,
Both
but we
ways.
didn't, no, we didn't have that, when we were starting out, in the 1980s. So um, we were just benchmarking off each other and trying to, what made sense.
Right.
And really, and bringing it back to negligent security, I say, yeah, what makes sense, and you talk about the standards that a security director will be held to. It's that reasonable person standard, in law. What would a reasonable security director have done for their security program in that same situation that caused that negligent security claim to arise? And then there's a case out there, Supreme Court case we know from our use of force claims, the Graham v. Connor case in 1989 from the U.S. Supreme Court. And it's just that you're going to be judged based upon what would have been the right thing to do given the right set of circumstances at that exact time with the knowledge that you knew. So you're not going to be held to the hindsight is 2020 standard, because that's what everybody, we know that something happens, security's involved and everybody's just picking apart the uh the incident in some kind of a root cause analysis. And yeah, that would have been great if the security officer knew that there was a hold on that patient before they let them walk out the door. um, you know but they didn't, and they did what they thought was right, and they just kind of didn't want to be uh, accused of false imprisonment or something like that. So
Yeah.
again, so I would say get those policies and understand what training looks like in a healthcare security program, and you know, try to make sure that you are meeting those community standards or regional standards for your hospital, and really use leverage all that and for your request. One thing that somebody posted on one of my LinkedIn comments today on negligent security. Um, I believe it's my friend Mike D'Angelo, who's also a expert witness,
Mhm.
and he indicated that what he's seen and I see is that we'll go in to try to defend a hospital, and there's no security management plan written. There has never been a security assessment done, much less brought in a security consultant to look at your security program and evaluate it. Uh, these are things that are best practices, and really, um, don't even do it just to avoid a negligent security thing. Do it because it's the right thing to do, first of all. Second of all, it's going to help your advocate for all your resourcing. The third thing it does for you is when the Joint Commission or DNV or whoever's accrediting your hospital comes in and does their inspection and sees that you've hired a consultant to come in and evaluate your security program, they look on that as so favorably. It might give them pause to stop looking at other things. uh, so you didn't hear that from me, but
Oh yeah.
um, and then, of course, think about your administrator or your CEO who's going to be deposed in that negligent security claim. And it says, well, what did you do? Well, we had we do an annual assessment every year, but you know what? Just to make sure, we brought in somebody from the outside, and we do that every 5 years. And I think that's, these are things that you can do that really a proactive organization does to help prevent these types of things from occurring.
Yeah, there's so much to digest with what was just said, and Bill, I want to come back to that last piece. I've got some questions I really want us to dig into about that. But when you think about the IHSS guidelines, one, I owe you a drink now because I would have been happy to pay you $20 for that plug, but because I've spent the last 15 years of my professional life really being heavily engaged with that, and know what that body of work and the effort it takes on. And to your point, why do that? Well, I wished I would have had it. I mean, I remember Colling's book was one of the absolute treasures for me, and just sort of a resource. And now we're really trying to leverage the operational guidelines, as we refer to them, and in the midst of just starting to work on the new design guidelines and a fourth edition that'll start happening this coming weekend. But it's funny though. I'll switch back to a comment you said. I mean, I've always asked this question. I mean, who is reasonable, and what does reasonable really mean? I mean, I guess sometimes thinking about definitions and knowing how important words matter. I guess sometimes the words ordinary, prudent come to mind, but if you were to talk to somebody new to the industry, what would you say reasonable is, or who is reasonable?
Well, well, I know my boss was never reasonable when I asked him for money. So I know it was sound
Right?
familiar out there.
I,
All
I haven't found that person either.
right. Well, and some of you may know this, but if in a you'll give the jury an instruction on what the reasonable person standard is, and it might be a little different in most states, but there's it's a person must exercise this what they call the standard of ordinary care, and that of a reasonable and prudent person in the same circumstances to avoid the liability or the situation that occurred that brought you all together in that room to try that case. So um, I say, from a security director's standpoint, what would have been a reasonable security measure to have in place that would have prevented that situation from occurring. And it doesn't need to be a $100,000 piece of equipment, or you need to have the top of the line weapons screening systems, or anything like that. No, it has to be reasonable to the situation. So let's kind of unpack that a little bit, because what's reasonable for one security director might not be reasonable across town for the other security director. And so if you're in a large uh, healthcare system, and you have resources, and you have the ability to provide security in all types of environments, whether they're high crime, or level 1 trauma center, or level 3, it doesn't matter. And then you have a small community access hospital 5 miles away, uh, that only sees, maybe 10 patients a day in the emergency room. So there may not even be security there, and that could be reasonable, um, given that situation. However, if that small community access hospital has seen a lot of activity in that facility, a lot of violence, that changes the reasonableness test a little bit. So you got to say what's reasonable, what can they afford, and how do we go about doing that? And that's really what it's all about. So reasonable and necessary are probably the two words that I would kind of keep bouncing around in your head, and determining what is the reasonable behavior test for a given situation.
Yeah, you talked earlier about foreseeability, which you think about the different tests to determine it, right? I mean, what was a crime, was an event that was foreseeable, and I feel like that's something that a lot of us are. We're still in the industry that is an art form, not a science, in so many different ways. So we are not able to prove or predict, and we're dealing with the human element pretty much more than anything else, and so that's we may see that change, and I'm excited to see us continue as an industry to move towards the evidence-based decisioning that I think will help us long term. And I applaud everyone in the industry who's whether they're participating in the crime survey, the data warehouse from IHSS, et cetera, and so forth. I feel like those are going to be game changers, especially for those that are following our footsteps. But I also start thinking about as we look into these other concepts of, okay, well, what else do we have? I mean, we're basically looking at, hey, there's foreseeable, specific harm, right? Have we had past experiences or similar events? But then there's also the words you hear often, Bill, totality of circumstances. The first two are a little more self-explanatory, but when you think about totality of circumstances, and you're talking to, someone within IHSS that might be new and talking about the differences and the issues, how would you define totality of circumstance to that individual?
Yeah, so that speaks to that first element, that general duty and foreseeability.
Hmm.
Um, and so there's three ways to look at it right now, and depending upon what state you're in. So there's um, I'm trying to think here. What is well, there's a couple different standards, but it's it's a standard where, say, uh, at the hardest to prove from for a plaintiff's standpoint, and this is best for a defendant, is if you're in a state where they require specific harm. So um, a good example would be a convenience store located in a bad neighborhood, and they haven't put up any protective glass or anything like that. And somebody comes in and robs the store, and that's the first time that store gets robbed. And maybe somebody gets hurt in the robbery, because we have to have somebody injured in order for the lawsuit to, to occur. So um, that state may opt to grant a motion for summary judgment. Hey, listen, there had never been a robbery at this store before, and it's what they call that specific harm test, or sometimes it's called the one free pass rule. So now you as that store owner know that a robbery, even though you got smacked across the top of the head, with this type of thing occurring in your store, now you know absolutely that this could occur. So the next time it happens, you can't get out of that lawsuit that easily, anyways. Then there's the next test, which is the minority of states are in what they call a sufficiently similar types of crime. So let's go back into that convenience store. Um, we knew that robberies are likely to occur, but somebody got carjacked out in the parking lot. Well, it's kind of in the robbery family, so to speak, and you are kind of responsible for the people in your parking lot, and you know that you do get robbed inside your store. It's sufficiently similar. The state is, or the court is going to allow that lawsuit to go forward.
Mhm.
But if it's a different type of crime altogether, uh, maybe not. But the totality of the circumstances is what most states use, and this is where it gets harder to defend the claim, specifically in hospitals, because they'll look at the crime rate occurring in the immediate vicinity around your facility or around the convenience store, either way. So it means you get to look at a greater geographic area and bring the whole neighborhood in. And if you have a bad neighborhood that's a mile away from your facility, you know that those folks that are in that neighborhood are going to be coming into your facility. So
Mhm.
you could tie that in. Then you could look at the entire security program, the lighting, the septed assessments, the landscaping, the design of the property. Have you allowed any deterioration, vandalism, graffiti, things like that? Do you have CCTV, physical security, access control? Do you have a security plan? And we're going to look at your entire security program. And this is where folks like myself and other security consultants who are hired in a negligent security claim, this is what we do. We're going to look at your entire security program in totality, and we're going to look at the environment, and we're going to look at the types of calls that are happening in your security department. How frequently is violence occurring? Um, and take that all into consideration to drive that negligent security claim going forward, which is why it's so important to have a well thought out and documented security management plan,
Mhm.
and to have a plan with a reasonable um, implementation of security measures that are reasonable and necessary to help the hospital stay safe. So um, you walk into a hospital your first year as a security director and you realize that they don't have anything. Well, you want to create that 3, 5 year plan going out, and this is what we're going to do. And the administration is willing to give us X amount of dollars every year going forward, and maybe just add on to that camera system, and then have it prioritized in such a way that you're covering your hot spots first, and
Mhm.
then branch out. So as long as it's a well thought out and reasonable plan, um, you'll be able to defend that. So totality of the circumstances takes into consideration that. But and like what I was saying earlier, in an excessive use of force case, or it doesn't even have to be excessive. If you're defending it, you're saying it was perfectly fine what the security officer did. We're going to look at the officer's training,
Mhm.
certifications, education level. How frequently do you train? How much training do you provide? Those types of things. How many security officers do you staff? Is that a reasonable number of security officers? Is two okay, or do you need four? And there's a formula for that, and through IHOS, and you could take a look at that. So you're looking at the universe of probability and the universe of your security program in understanding what the totality of circumstances are. And now that we've muddied that up and
Well,
created
it's
that.
so funny to hear you say that, Bill, because the S&P should not just be a check the box joint commission. Hey, I'm compliant with the accreditation expectation for me. It should be a thought out plan. And then you couple that, layer in more of a master plan. What are you trying to achieve over the course of time? And when we start thinking about getting resources allocated, once we are starting to be asked, well, why are you doing that? What are you trying to achieve? I was in a conversation just a couple of weeks ago with someone who had just the opposite issue of getting resources allocated. They presented a plan that was so well received by their executive team, they asked them to accelerate it. Came back and with the accelerants into it, then they said, can you do it even faster? Mainly because I think we're starting to see how essential healthcare security has become to a lot of the leaders, and they're trying to think, what more do we need to do to maintain the well-being of our staff, maintain the well-being of our folks, and really hit those marks. But but you touched on something I'd love to dig into, if I may, Bill, because next week, right, we're going to be in Nashville. We're going to be at the ACNE that IHSS is hosting the annual conference and exhibits for those who need that definite defined. I'm going to be facilitating a program I've been doing for years for those that are new to security in healthcare. They're managers, they're people that maybe executives that have oversight of the security function inside of healthcare. And I know you're giving a presentation on this very topic of negligence and security. But when we think back to those that are new to the industry, let's go back to the training conversation for just a second. Because not everything is going to be managed. But if we were going to advise those that are new how to apply all of our duties tests relative to the training of security staff, what would you what would you advise them? I mean, let's just think about this from the most rudimentary way, Bill, of what should they be aware of? I mean, obviously, there's training on patient interventions, there's training on the use of force, there's any defensive equipment that they're going to be asked to carry. They need to be there. There ought to be awareness of policies and procedures that the hospital has, especially those security related. But unpack that with me a little bit more. I think there's a lot to just just to educate, because once we open the box, then all of a sudden, all the rhyme and reasons for why we do the things that we do, and training being the topic du jour, it gets scrutinized. And I always say, can it pass a test of scrutiny? And I think it's important to try to do that. So let's I'd love to get your opinion on some of that.
Yeah. So there's different types of training. You can create your own training program,
Mhm.
or you can um, and part of that training program you could piece it together. So you had mentioned defensive tools like tasers and OC spray and handcuffs and things like that. You can get those certifications. You can get instructors maybe locally, or you can get them through agencies that specialize in training that are outside your area, and they'll come in. And I always find it best to have an internal security training program if you can. Some folks just aren't large enough or have the resourcing for that. So the security manager then becomes the de facto training coordinator and manager, and you have to keep on track of everybody's training, how much training they're getting, when they're getting it, certifications, and making sure that they get recertified on in time. Um, but definitely, if you're utilizing defensive tools, you have to get certified for that. And then there's aggression management, and there's a lot of different programs out there, and we don't have to go into all the names and acronyms for them, but that's one way to do it. Or you can pick apart all those programs and then create your own training program. It's very time intensive to do that, but I've seen organizations do it and do it well. So you can tailor your training to your needs, and it might be a little bit cheaper to do it that way, or maybe not. I don't know. It depends. Um, as far as uh, the other thing I would stress too is, the I keep going back to the International Association for Healthcare Security and Safety, but they have their basic security officer level, the
Yeah.
advanced, the security supervisor, and then the CHPA. And
Mhm.
I think that's a great thing to just lay into your security program, to have all your officers certified through IHOS. That's great. That's an independent body coming in and evaluating the training that you provided to your security officers. And if they're passing those examinations, they're retaining that. And that is healthcare specific training. I know a lot of states also offer or have requirements on
Mhm.
generalized security officer training, and some of those are good, and some of them, you know,
Right.
not so good. But I think IHOS is really maybe, yeah, probably I'll go as far as to say the gold standard to have all your officers certified that way. And then you could layer in what additional security training that you think is pertinent to your particular hospital. Again, you would add one of those aggression management classes on top of that, and then defensive weapons. Maybe you have other things that you're looking at. I see a lot of a lot of neat stuff going on here with weapons screening. Some hospitals are starting to get canine programs, and some are even looking into drones.
Right.
Um, just a lot of cool stuff. But you want to make sure you're researching uh, those those security measures, what goes into them, and the training that people should be receiving on those security measures. And make sure you're doing it appropriately. Because the other thing that could lead to a negligent security claim is if you go ahead and get yourself a canine or a weapon system, or like I say, a lot of healthcare systems utilize a visitor management system. But when we come in and evaluate them, there's holes in the training. The staff are not fully engaged or knowledgeable on the processes that are involved in those security measures, and that can get you sued too. So just because you have it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. It could be a bad thing if you're not managing it properly, because then that creates exposure for you. So it's working against you.
Yeah, and that's not just training of the security staff. You could have guest services or somebody there that needs to understand, hey, what are the expectations that we have of them when they may have a disruptive individual or someone that's giving them pause for concern, right? And the training concerns, in my opinion, and we're getting a lot of just great feedback in the chat section here, Bill. But there's also the mindset of, hey, what are the regulatory bodies expecting, right? I mean, we've seen some changes now in 2022 with Joint Commission saying, hey, thou shalt train, right? I mean, it's no longer thou are encouraged. They're basically saying you should do it. Now, they're still not saying exactly who all would be, but I would hate to have a security staff member not showing that level of training that's necessary to manage it. But especially when it comes to, you know, what are the weapons that can be used and can't and shouldn't be used with patients, especially. We think about the test of scrutiny. It, 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 we get the State Department of Health or whatever it may be called in the various jurisdiction. It's a, it, they are making some very strong expectations. And, I thought they came out late in November last year and said, hey, they expect us to be able to control violence. They expect us to put systems and things in place, which I think long term, that's only going to add to, what is expected of the security program inside of healthcare. And I think that's going to change quite a bit. But Bill, as we think about so much of what happens inside of healthcare. And I saw something posted recently. It talked about budgets, and it was a pretty good little graphic. I think it was Dave Corbin that posted it, but it was, where your budgets are normally, where your budgets go after an event, and then what happens shortly thereafter. And so much of it, it just feels like we have a lot of knee-jerk reactions after adversity, after an event that has occurred. Whether those budgets just become, I wouldn't say unlimited, but they become a lot more free flowing. Um, but when I think about how things ebb and flow on that, and especially we put a big staff security, not just security staff, but a hospital staff training initiative together. But we do this, we go back to normal. Bursties occurred. How does such an approach help or hinder a healthcare facility? Does it, when you think about, and I'm sure this is going to probably be in the eyes of the jury that's been selected, but you start contemplating, we now are doing this, but we didn't know to do it ahead of time, or we just elected not to do it ahead of time. Those are some debatable points, right? But as we start thinking about making all these mass changes right after an event, does that help an organization? Does it hinder potentially an organization? Well, what's your thinking about that?
Well, it's a two-edged sword, first of all.
Yeah.
Um, I remember I was the security director for Advent Health here in Orlando during the Pulse nightclub shooting incident. And we had, while we weren't the primary receiving facility, we did treat 14 of the shooting victims. And I remember those that month really after that shooting. And those were 80-hour weeks for myself and my team, and it was a great team. Still is a great team. Uh, it's a very solid core of individuals who are dedicated security professionals there. But here's what happened. And first thing I'll say is always have a plan sitting on your shelf, even if the administration at current time, they don't want to do anything in terms of security, and maybe their financial priorities are elsewhere, and that's
Swiss
business. That
tolerance. Swiss
Yeah,
tolerance. Yeah.
right. Uh, but sooner or later, something is going to happen. It's going to be either internal or external to your facility. And like I said, the Pulse incident was sort of both in a way. I mean, yeah, the incident occurred in a nightclub, but the impact on the community of Orlando, and I imagine the same was in Boston during the bombing
Sure.
incident. And
Mhm.
we had a significant number of patients in our facility that were Hispanic or gay or minorities of one variety or another. I'm not naive or anything, and but I never understood the degree of hatred out there until I started getting all these threats to our not only the patients that we had to put under lock and key and guard them 24/7, but to our staff members, our physicians, our nurses who were being threatened by people for taking care of these unfortunate shooting victims, and that was very sad. And that rocked the psyche of our organization a little bit. And part of it also wasn't, while we had, and what we did, and I'll share this with the team here, we had all of the shooting victims on one unit, and it was locked down, and we had security posted in multi layers. You could not
Mhm.
get into that unit. Um, but think about, you're a healthcare system, right? And you have 6 to 12 to 15 hospitals in your city, and they're all named the same thing, Methodist, whatever, or Advent Health, this, that location, whatever. They don't know one location from the other, and so you have to have all of your sites on a high state of alert for the crazy that is out there to meet those challenges. But what happened to us is that we had our C-suite come to us about 2 weeks after the shooting incident and say, "Hey, we'd like a couple suggestions on security improvements that we could make." And during that 2 weeks, what I saw in the newspaper was, and I'm not going to name the health systems. But one was we were going to do X-ray machines, and the other one was going to arm their security force, And when you talk about knee-jerk reactions, that's what they were. Um,
Hmm.
then we had our healthcare organization, and I give these leaders a lot of credit. They're very smart people. They were very calculated. They listened, and they thought our plan was reasonable. You know, we weren't asking for the moon, but we were asking for a lot. And they didn't say yes immediately. But what they did do is they took one C-suite member took one or two of the security measures, and we'll say that there maybe are 20 in this plan, and vet those over a couple weeks period. So that's what I was doing
Hmm.
with a lot of my security team, and working with those C-suite members, and working through those various different recommendations and pricing them out and how they fit into that multi-layered strategy. Then um, what they did is they approved them, but they wanted to have the plan vetted by an external consultant. So no matter how many years you've been in healthcare security, no matter if whatever, I got a JD, and that you're never a prophet in your hometown.
Right.
So if you're climbing that mountain yourself, and you could be the most experienced healthcare security person on this call, and I'll bet you're having problems trying to advocate for resourcing that to you and everybody else on this call would be so reasonable and necessary. uh, that if you don't do it, you're going to get yourself sued. So, anyways, but it's better to have
Right.
somebody like a Brian, or some of the other guys who do the same type of work, um, make that do that explanation for you,
Right.
because it's not that they're smarter than you. It's just that they're validating a thought process or something that you've assessed, and they are explaining to your leader why. And you know what? If you've already explained it, this person's explaining it, and they're probably saying the same thing you said. So now they're hearing it for the second time, and now it makes sense. So
Well, think about it as patients going for various procedures. Sometimes we do want a second opinion, right? And just to
yeah,
validate, hey, what we're getting ready to do. And I think the monies that we're talking about, especially, we're not just always adding a person. I mean, it's a lot of technology. Sometimes it can be procedural changes that we're making that have a tremendous amount of cultural impact to an organization, but the costs are minimal. Um, but I've found a lot, Bill, is half our job in this space is to be an educator. We have to continue to share, to note. I'm finding, as I've been in this business for 30 years now, that the administrators, especially some of the early careers, have taken a stronger interest in the security and protection and safeness of healthcare. However, with that being said, I think we still have to recognize we know they're not getting training about security or even risk management in their MHAs or MBA programs. We know the docs aren't getting much about aggression management, nor the nurses and their training leading up to us. So, how do we bring that attention to them? And you used the conversation about the guidelines earlier that IHSS is producing, but we're basically trying to leverage the voice of the many over the individual. And that means what we are trying to present is, hey, there's the better practice. There is the standard of care. And there's still times when organizational risk tolerances will not allow for whatever we may be suggesting, which may be what we all feel strongly and is the right direction. But for any number of reasons, it could be fiscally, it could be reputationally, it could be we don't want to create the security state mentality um, that happen. I just try to encourage people most of the time is don't just use security as the only reason why we're doing something. Does it create a better patient experience? Does it create a better well-being for those employees that we're working so desperately to try to keep now, especially when we see the expenditures that are being paid for travelers, et cetera? how can we now start tying into what we're doing that ties into, as I look at a question that's in the chat, how do you talk to an administrator? Well, talk to them about what it is that they're dealing with. One, most CEOs are going to have three primary responsibilities. They got to manage the risk facing the organization, they got to manage the strategy of the organization, and they got to manage the culture facing the organization. And those three things we want to make certain we're trying to tie into. Now, that's getting resources allocated. Doesn't necessarily mean we're going to always be able to get everything that we want. And it doesn't mean that we won't have a plaintiff attorney that's going to come after any expectation of what's going on. But it's scrutiny, I think we all have to just be prepared for, right? It's going to happen. Crediting bodies, lawyers, even sometimes administrators for why we're spending and doing what we're doing, right? That's just the nature of this. But Bill, I would say, you talked one more thing about, and I saw you quoted here recently too, but the 5-year process of getting an independent consultant in, I do think there's a lot of value in that. I think that, how do we really manage by getting some other outside opinions? And sometimes that independent consultant can be, sharing with another colleague that is running a similar type of system, and when monies are tight, you just take advantage of each other and say, hey, can we do this collectively together? And finding ways that will allow us to learn from each other. It's been the origin of IHSS in so many ways, as we've alluded to in this conversation, but it's important in my opinion. And it doesn't mean that we're always going to follow, they're going to follow every recommendation made. And knowing that as a consultant, any parting words here in a couple minutes we have left with this audience about, the recommendations when they're not followed, what you advise your clients to make certain we don't create an exhibit in a lawsuit that says this is what's going on. So I'm just curious if, as we start thinking about giving recommendations, making suggestions for positive and impactful change, and it's not followed.
Well, try to steer that paper trail a little bit, and we'll advocate for this down the road. This is not, we'll have to reassess this, type of response. I think just when you have a definitive no, and stay away from the cost, factor. It's so hard to say, well, we didn't put this in because it would have cost so much, and then that you're just giving ammunition to the plaintiff.
Why are you making me think of a Ford Pinto right now when I hear you say that?
But here, you said something about how do you explain security to your administration, because they don't teach security administration
Exactly.
in hospital administrator school. So um, here, so when I write articles, I try to write them for security directors to hand off to their administrators. And I just wrote an article on how to what the value of a security program is, and how to explain that to the C-suite, or some title along those lines. But it really just breaks down a security program. I euphemistically call it um, security for sweet dummies, because they don't understand it, because it's hard to conceptualize risk, and where it exists, and what is a security program. What does a hospital security program look like in this day and age, and what should it do? And so I wrote that. It's in the last healthcare protection journal, if you
Mhm.
have that. If you don't, just hit me up on LinkedIn, or if you have my email address, go ahead and send me an email. I'll send it over to you. It's great. You just give it to your security administrator, and it helps explain what hopefully what you want to do with your security program. If you have a bad security program, you may not want to give it to them, because then they're going to ask you, hey, how come you're not doing this? But
Right.
so that, and I, the Joint Commission's new requirements. I think they're great. I think the folks who collaborated on that are just we're really moved the needle. We're one step closer to getting, I won't say legislation passed on what is required in a healthcare security program. I hope that does get passed, but I know that there's certain realities that we need to deal with. So, but the Joint Commission article that I wrote on that is also what makes a good workplace violence program, and makes you compliant, is really what that article is all about. And that's the handover to your um, administration as well.
Yeah, great tools and resources, and I think that's what we have to continue to do. We gotta keep presenting information, and remember that we need to be a mentor to these folks. To me, most of their learnings are coming from having an adverse event or having a good teacher along the way, and I think that's the one that we have to look at, even though we may not always get that opportunity. We want to take full advantage. And your resources are fantastic, by the way. I leverage your writing quite a bit. I know Alan and I were talking about it when we were chatting about body worn cameras here earlier in this year. But Bill, let me just say this: we've caught to our time. I knew this conversation would go fast, and God, you're such a good person just to chat with. My ears are back, and I do look forward to spending some time with you next week. But let me say thanks for spending time with me and the audience today. Your insights, your perspectives, how useful, how valuable they are. Um, as a self-described healthcare security industry advocate, let me just also say thanks for doing all that you're doing to make our society and the healthcare industry safer. It's really appreciated. Your give back is just something that sets an example for so many, and it's appreciated. And for all of you in the audience, thanks for joining me again. We have a survey that will be shared shortly afterwards. Just share what you liked, share what you might not have, but also let us know what topics you want to continue to learn more about. So until next time, stay safe, stay diligent, and stay aware. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.